Hi, Alan Stratton from As Wood Turns. Today I'd like to see what I can do with this piece of walnut. It's walnut limb wood, and so there's not a whole lot of heartwood in it. And I already know that there's some issues around the pith. It's rather weak, but I'll see what I can do with that later. Well, let's just see what we can do with just this little piece of wood. Not a great specimen, but it's a good piece of wood.
Yeah, I pre-drilled a small hole for the screw chuck that I'll be using today and roughed it up a little bit, but not nearly as much as I probably should. The rough turning is when I have the most pressure on the tools and the most pounding. So I like to pull up the tailstock and use it as almost a safety measure to make sure that the bowl doesn't loosen up on the screws and go flying away at this point. Have seen bowls loosen and such. The tailstock tends to just hold it in there just a little bit and provide that a little bit additional safety zone or safety measure to do it. Need to flatten off the bottom of the bowl. For this I use a little bit of a scraping cut to begin with and to get it flat and smooth. Then I need to turn a tenon on the bottom because I'll be using a jawed chuck to do it. Once the tenon's turned, it has a little bit of a dovetail on it. Swap the chucks over and mount the bowl bottom into the chuck. Recheck for the roundness and then touch up the outside a little bit, make sure it's smooth. And then go on and rough turn the outside of the bowl. Now you should, in cutting, try and cut from the uphill to the downhill, and on a gouge especially use ride the bevel. Find the bevel. It's kind of a trick to doing that, but when you do it, it's really sweet. And ride the bevel down. However, I get a little bit nervous when I'm in tight quarters here like this small bowl, and when I'm close to the chuck, I'll use more of a cut away and cut uphill. Sometimes it's a kind of a skew scrape that I learned from Mike Mahoney. But work on the outside a little bit here and get it to the point where it's just a nice pleasing shape. It's hard to visualize because the can't really mount got to imagine what it'll be for the very foot of the bowl, and that's kind of the trick to do it. Then flatten the face and start hollowing out the bowl. Occasionally add a little more CA glue to the threads because they've been now cutting from the both sides, and strengthen that. But when hollowing out the bowl, I like to use my bowl gouge here the most, and to do that I'll turn it up on its side on the tool rest and kind of match the very tip and the direction of the very tip to be very much just right with the perpendicular to the bowl, and then just kind of very lightly touch it, push it into the bowl a little bit, and catch the bevel then just a little bit, and then ride it in. And then as I go in, I'm rotating the tool to change the direction of the cut, swinging the tool around and actually changing the elevation of the tool. So it's taken I'm still trying to perfect that move and get it. But this is probably the most fun part of bowl turning is getting the center. It's also the most nervous time for me, as if you get it too thin or go too deep, you have the risk making what I call a funnel. That's what used to be a bowl, but now could only be used to funnel something else into another bowl. As I cut away some of the CA glue, I want to make sure that those end grain parts are still strong, and add a little more CA glue to make sure there's strength. The problem with CA glue and wood turning is that even with accelerant, the fumes, as you heat it up and cut it away, the fumes can be quite noxious, and you want to be careful of that and have some good ventilation, or wait a little bit longer for it to dry. But it takes multiple times to stop, feel it, enjoy the process, enjoy the grain as it's coming out, and as you can see the grain coming. bottom is now a combination with it's really deep is a little bit of scraping action with the skew. Probably should use a scraper on it, but haven't. And then finish up the outside of the bowl. Get to the fine point. And then the part that I don't like, that I hate the worst, and that's the sanding. I'm using a combination sanding of starting with 80 grit. That's what I'll spend the most time on, probably twice as much as any other grit. And then work up through 100 grit, 120 grit, 150 grit, 180 grit, 220 grit. Could go higher, but with walnut being quite an open pore wood, I haven't seen the need to go higher than 220 on this. I might go 320 sometime, but for the most part 220 it is. Now I have a sander that I could use and sanding pads, but for this small of a bowl those don't seem to work very well, so I'm just using my hands. Just make sure that you sand downhill, and so that if you do happen to contact the chuck or something else, that it just throws your hand away from the tool and not catch it into the tool. I don't always do that. When I violate that rule, I generally suffer for it, literally, with that. In the finishing, I'm using a shellac friction polish. It's quite a nice, enjoys the heat, dries quickly so that I can go on with the turning. So dismount it, enjoy the grain a little bit, and now it's time to turn it over and make a nice foot on this bowl. So to do that, I'll open up the chuck and mount that tenon that I cut earlier in the jaws of the chuck. But it was unfortunately just, in this case, I'm not mounting the tenon. I already did that, but I'm mounting the outside of the bowl. I want to pat it a little bit, but it's too big for that chuck, so change the jaws. And as you would know it, it's too small for that. So I had a little bit of padding with some sanding mat that I had laying around the shop. Cut it out, wedge it in there, and pull up the tailstock to secure it a little bit, and then with very, very light touch start finishing the bottom of the bowl. Now I probably could have gone deeper on this bowl, but I just practice, and I'll cut a little bit away. I don't want a really heavy bottom bowl, so here we go. And then have to remove the tailstock at some point and tool it. Again, it's hard to tool that last little bit. Ouch! It flew off, jumped out of the lathe. It wasn't secure enough. I'll put it back in, but that put a nice couple of dings in this bowl, but I'll finish it anyway. And tool it down. Carefully make sure it gets in there. Oh, ouch! Did it again. This time I cut some actual wood blocks that would hold it more securely in the chuck, but since there's 4 of them, 4 jaws, I had to recruit another pair of hands from my wife to hold them while we cut it in. Okay, here we go. Let's finish the bottom. Sometimes cutting, sometimes a scraping action, and just by changing the gouge and the direction, you really do quite a bit. A little bit of shear scraping, nice fine little shavings with that. Get it. I don't want to cut too high because the top edge of the bowl I really can't get to, and with the wooden blocks that are there, they're a little bit sticking out a little bit further than they would otherwise, so I'm really limited in what I can do here. So I very, very carefully turn the bottom, get it to where it has a nice little shape. I'm actually having a change up on this bowl just at the point where I'm interfacing between the new turning and the previously finished wood. Then sand it out again, go through the same grit sequence as I had on the rest of it, and work up through the 80, the 100, the 120, up to 220. Make sure that it feels good, it looks good. And then the same friction polish, and with the shellac nature of it and having it dried, it blends very, very well. I have, on the finer grits, gone up in a little bit more into the previous finish just to make sure that I get all the scratches out and it looks good. Pull it out, admire it, here we go. But it's got some bad knocks in it, but it did survive.